Today, Chris Hubbard is going to be presenting. He's the VP of Data Strategy at Moore's THD division, talking about metrics that matter and how to create dashboards that drive impact.
Thanks, Nick. Hey, everyone. Great to be here today. I'm Chris Hubbard. I'm the VP of Data and Analytics Strategy at THD. We're one of the Moore companies. And in my role, I really sit between our market analytics and technology team, our account and strategy teams, and our clients, and really do my best to help ensure everyone is really making the most out of their data assets they have available to them. That includes driving insights from all data, including what they can throw into dashboards. It's one of the best ways to do it efficiently, which is why I'm here today. I've been with THD for close to 18 years, leading fundraising strategy on many national accounts across many different sectors before migrating into this current role. In my time before THD, I spent 5 years on the nonprofit side, working at a school for deaf children. And funny story, my first task there was actually migrating their data from a really high-tech filing cabinet system into their very first database, GiftMaker Pro. Hopefully, well, someone might still be on that. I think it might have been sunsetted. But it's amazing how far things have come since that point. Anyhow, it's nice to see such a big group here today, and we'll go ahead and jump in. Okay. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk briefly about how changing consumer and marketing program needs are impacting our daily lives and our marketing worlds. We'll talk about how dashboards help us cut through the clutter in this new world with so many channels and potential touch points available, and look at some examples. We'll touch on a few important tips and pitfalls you can run into when building out dashboards. And then we'll talk about the key questions that you really need to ask as you embark on your own dashboard journeys. I'm sure there's a mix of marketing executives, program managers, and technology folks all on the call today. You all bring a different perspective to the table. So if there's a question that comes up that I can't answer on the fly, I'll be happy to get back to you after the presentation, or we can schedule some time to discuss. And at the very least, I can help point you in the right direction. So let's talk about that crazy world we're in now. So there's really no doubt that we're in the midst of what we call a data revolution. We're all seeing it really, regardless of our role in the industry and really in our daily lives, right? Everyone's tracking all of our movements, and direct marketing and brand universes are really colliding at this point. And it used to be really straightforward that brand marketing was here at the top of the funnel, and direct marketing was on the bottom end of the funnel. It was very simple. But in the current state, consumers really expect a seamless brand experience no matter where they are in their journey. And this is largely driven by how consumer product companies are interacting, engaging with us on a daily basis, but also carries over to our sector as well. And we've really all been conditioned to that at this point and have that need as consumers. And there's no doubt that the explosion of inbound and outbound channel choices have yielded many great fundraising opportunities. That's 100% a fact. At the same time, they can make it especially difficult to deliver the consistent brand experience. And we know silos can lead to a fragmented customer experience. So our point of view is that this dynamic necessitates a migration from a channel-driven approach to an interconnected audience-first marketing approach. But that doesn't just happen on its own, right? It needs careful planning driven through strategic insights. And we want our results to demonstrate that we're building solid relationships with our constituents. And so we need ways to quickly know whether the steps we're taking are really moving the needles. And that's kind of where dashboards come in, right? Because dashboards offer a solution by condensing multiple reports down into digestible visuals such as graphs, charts, tables, and metrics, and displaying those visuals in a straightforward analytics dashboard. And what they really allow is business decision makers to review significant amounts of valuable information at a glance. It's kind of the perfect antidote to analysis paralysis. And dashboards are all about reducing the time to value. I don't think anyone here is going to question the power of having more information but we need to be able to extract value from that information quicker. And that's precisely what dashboards do. So with the upfront investment of time put into creating dashboards, you'll gain insights quicker, you'll benefit from those learnings, and really that will hasten ROI of your marketing efforts. And the same statement can really be said about any business intelligence initiative, but dashboards sort of are at the top of the heap in terms of elevating insights sooner. So what do you need to be able to start putting dashboards together? Well, we believe that because we're trying to get our arms around how an audience is engaging, that you need a 360-degree view of your constituents, and that's critical. And you need that data structure to support that. And without all the touch points represented, you only have a partial picture of your donors' behavior. And then that limits your ability to connect with them using the most relevant creative and channels. So simply put, really an audience first, data-driven approach to constituent relationship management results in a better constituent experience. And that translates into deeper engagement and higher long-term value. And at the end of the day, right, that's what's going to bring in more money for us as fundraisers. You can see in the chart here, there's different types of information that we want to make sure we're bringing into the tools. Demographics, how are they contributing in the nonprofit marketplace, financial and wealth information, what are their lifestyles and interests. And the more information you have like this that you can bring together with all your behavioral data, the more well-rounded picture you can have of your constituents, which then you can start to manifest in a dashboard environment. So you need to ask yourself, are you collecting data from all the available sources out there? And do you have that data stored in a way that is consistent so that you can use it effectively in a more automated dashboard structure? And if there's any questions about the value, do you really need to bring all this information together? The answer is yes. Countless analyses point to the fact that constituents who engage in multiple ways are significantly more valuable than those that don't. We've looked across this across many different organizations. We typically see that, or people who are engaging across different components, different aspects of your mission, different types of programs are worth about 3 times as much as those who are not. And that's not comparing people who only have one action, that's comparing people who have multiple actions, either through a single channel or program versus people who have multiple actions through different programs. So expanding that brand footprint is really important. And it's something we want to be able to have more donors, more constituents go down that path. So proactively create pathways for people to get to that place where they're engaging across channels. So sitting behind all strong dashboard environments is a consolidated data set that incorporates data from your CRM and your various performance analytics systems, right? And when you combine those with other relevant external market and trend data, you end up with a data warehouse or CDP that is armed with all the data you need to deliver some great dashboard insights. And this topic alone is a 3-4 hour conversation. So we're not going to go deep on this, but hopefully you get the picture. You need to have your data organized and code in a way that supports your dashboard environment. And sometimes that's more challenging than others. But once you have that, you have the proper consolidated data, you can create dashboards that truly do allow you to start to understand the full funnel, sort of omni-channel view of behavior. And dashboards can really be central to understanding audience composition, relationship building success, things like retention, financials, KPI tracking, comparing performance across segments, and migration of giving and channel behavior. So there's lots to benefit from once you invest the time to put into the dashboards. So what does an effective marketing dashboard look like? I don't think there's one single perfect answer to dashboarding. It really needs to meet your needs as an organization. And as an agency, we've built out some visualizations that help us dig into our client programs. At THD, we call it THD Lens. They use Tableau. We are doing a lot of work with Power BI. That's another commonly used dashboard platform. And while each visualization product has its own pros and cons, they're all very good at helping you elevate those key insights more quickly, which is the point, as mentioned before, about dashboards. So this is just a quick screenshot of some of our views that we include in our dashboards. These are for both internal staff and client access. Our dashboards have become sort of the first stop for answering any analytic questions. There's a cohesive look and feel, looking across the dashboard functions. We're able to tell performance stories for our clients in a more digestible way. So thinking about that narrative of performance. It's certainly better than having 10 separate spreadsheets full of numbers and a couple of custom charts that were built. It's really great having this resource. I do want to note that there's a limit to dashboards. We have a business intelligence tool set that sits beside the dashboards where we can really get deeper into the weeds when necessary, right? That's not really the point of dashboards, is to elevate those key insights, but there's times when you need to dive a little deeper. So those two things complement each other. And let's take a look at some dashboard views that might serve as inspiration for you as you're thinking about how to approach your programs. Okay. First point I want to make is just select your most critical KPI metrics for your audience. I emphasize the most critical, not all your KPIs. If you try to cover everything, it's going to get a little messy. You want to be judicious. This view here is a rolling 12-month audience KPI report that gives us sort of that highest level snapshot of donor engagement and revenue trends. It's pretty clean. It was developed with that intent, and it was really developed for the purposes of more of an executive summary, executive leadership view, where they could get their insights in 30 seconds or less, understand exactly what's going on. This tracks revenue, donors, revenue per donor, the number of new donors were selected as for the primary KPIs, retention rate, and coverage ratio to help us know whether or not we're adequately replacing lost donors. Sort of a neat function here. The blue lines on top of the metric blocks reflect the year-over-year rolling 12-month trending. So not only are we understanding what happened this past year, but we can understand upswings and downswings in recent months. Sort of how are we pacing now? Good. Revenues in the last couple of months of the year trended up. That's great. Through filtering here, we can understand the performance of different audiences, and a number of them are loaded into this view so that we can, just with the click of a button, switch between audiences. These could be donors originating through various sources, participants in various programs. We can also narrow down all of this to any specific life cycle segments, which is going to give us a little bit more drill down functionality. We've got our magnifying glass here as our icon for drilling in. So yeah, I can see here in this example that retention's up 7%, but that doesn't really tell me the whole story. I need to understand that better. So with a click through to another view, right, that focuses on retention of each life cycle segment. So in this instance, we still have the filters above, but we've got 4 circle graphs here that show the retention trends by life cycle segments. And the important thing to note here is that there's some additional visualizations that provides sort of a seasoned fundraiser more context. So we had huge growth in first-year audience for this organization in that prior year. The gray underlying the colored bar is the prior year size of that population. So we might expect that there's been some change in the amount of people that are retained where we're still up 6%, which is fantastic. Maybe we acquired some more marginal donors. And the chart on the bottom right shows us that first year donors now make up a higher part of the overall composition. And that's something that can affect your aggregate metrics. Why are we only up 7% if all these life cycle segments are up? Well, 3 out of 4 life cycle segments are up by double digits. So it just helps put context. So wherever you can use visualizations to provide that additional context, it's something that I would recommend.
And Chris, we have a question in the chat. This is an organization where they're getting stuck in stage 1. They're having trouble aggregating the data that's necessary in the first place. And so looking at these dashboard measures, you have revenue across what is, for some organizations, multiple different systems. Any advice on how to start there?
Yeah, I mean, that's not uncommon. And because all of this does rely on having a sound data structure, that's really the first place you need to start. And that involves conversations, sometimes hard conversations, but conversations with your IT team. If you work with an agency, talk to them about solutions they might have for bringing data together. Having that data warehouse layer to be able to transform some data, or even to do some fixes at times if necessary, as root system data is not always perfectly aligned with your dashboard needs. I think that's really where I would start. And I would also say perfection is the barrier to progress. So start by getting the data and the views together for what you can get at. And at some of those more complicated functions or visualizations or data consolidation projects can come along, you can always add those in.
Yeah, definitely the first 80% will take 80% of your time, and the next 20% will take the other 80% of your time.
Something like that.
Question looking at these dashboards about what dashboard tool is being shown right now.
So these views are coming out of Tableau. As I mentioned, there's a lot of work done with Power BI, but this is specifically Tableau.
Okay, and then another question about architecture here. How do you get the data for the retention rates? Is that included through the organization's CRM?
So we're getting the data. In this instance, all the transactions for a particular client are coming out. They're in our data warehouse. There's aggregations that are going on that put people into the life cycle buckets, and then you can look year over year to understand the migration and how many people are kept. So
great, thank you.
In terms of context, there's some additional context that's really helpful and has been particularly helpful over the last couple of years. We've incorporated a host of external data points into our cash flow trends dashboard, and our cash flow trends dashboard updates every time we get data from an organization. So some of our clients, this is on a daily basis, so where we can monitor revenue trends versus the prior year. Sort of this bottom line is the rolling 7-day trend compared to the same period in the prior year. So the red or orange color is good, and the blue means we're behind the prior year. And the reason we do a 7-day rolling average is to smooth out some of the peaks and valleys you might see if it was all the actuals values coming in there. And so as a visualization, we have the ability to filter on any selected date range. We can exclude or include any particular gift range. And so there's a lot of flexibility there. Or we could even click on a specific state via this map and get the metrics specifically for a state or a region that might be important for you as a tracker. We also know that nothing we do as fundraisers really happens in a vacuum. So we need to understand the giving trends in the context of sort of our donors' greater life experience. So we started bringing in these external data points during COVID because we're really interested to understand, what's going on, as COVID goes up, is there a negative effect on fundraising or vice versa? And I think at that point, we all were a little alarmed at first, but then, hey, this ended up being a good time for fundraising for most organizations. We also brought in economic indicators. So we've got gas prices, sort of as information we can get on a daily basis as a proxy for inflation. We've got weekly unemployment claims, and we've got S&P 500 trends, so that we can monitor performance against the market and understand what's going on here. And the two areas that are in the boxed circles here, the box squares, are times where we saw long sustained drops within the S&P 500 in the spring and in the fall. And when we look at fundraising year over year performance during those times, we're seeing some of the more pronounced and prolonged declines in year over year performing. So a view like this was really helpful for floating up to leadership in the organization and helping provide additional context, to the results that we were seeing.
We have a couple additional questions for the organizations that you're building these types of dashboards for, or that are building themselves. What's the size of the donor base that you're looking for, and how small can that go? When is it effective by size of organization to build one of these dashboards?
So we have built dashboards for clients of all small, medium, and large. I mean, if you're in the hundreds of donors, there may be less inherent value. But once you get up into the thousands and tens of thousands of donors, these trends are at least the ability to be able to slice and dice, because that's a lot of what the dashboard allows you to do. You want to have, a certain degree of scale if you want to break things into every budget category or break it down into different audiences. But the cash flow would be relevant for anyone. It just might be able to take advantage of more of the functionality in a statistically valid way if there were more donors. But it doesn't need to be hundreds of thousands. It certainly works in the tens of thousands, and could probably even be meaningful at a little bit less scale.
That's great. And then about the creation of the dashboards, were these slides created manually from the data compiled into Google Docs, or automated directly from tech platforms? Combination of both? How did you go about that?
Combination of both, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but try to wherever we can automatically incorporate the data directly into the warehouse and then into the platform, the better, right? Because this is all about speed. If it takes a week to compile the information, we've lost the benefit of the dashboard, really. So, we work to automate as many of those processes as possible. And even when we were looking for external data, we were looking for external data that we could bring in an automated way. So it's not, there's the upfront investment in time to do that, but it's not a drain on staff time, moving data around all the time to support the dashboards.
Thank you.
Another piece of advice I would have is to summarize financials in a clean, sort of unquestionable ways. I've seen dashboards where you look at them and you're trying to get the key information out of them and you can't. And they can be over-engineered at times. So specifically with financials, put the numbers in there, right? So this is just a budget versus actual view that summarizes sort of current progress versus fundraising goals and prior year performance. And while the top half kind of gives us the progress. The bottom half of this view provides us more context through being able to drill in on a specific month and understand where we're ahead, where we're behind. And I could say, wow, it's great. We're up for the year. That's awesome. But why was January up so much over last year? So, I have the ability to click on January and start to understand at sort of the program level, well, where's that variance coming from? And wow, we're up 31% in revenue versus the prior year in January. That seems weird. I don't remember doing anything very specific that would have driven that increase. So, and a lot of it's coming in renewal. So then you could click again and go into renewal and say, wow, up 37% in renewal. Well, this seems like a little bit of anomaly as I'm looking at this. And I'm using this as a case in point for how you can drill down to get deeper insights about the programs, even in a sort of high level budget versus actual view like this. This was an anomaly. There was some gift processing delays. So there's a reason that December was down and January is up. But, I think you get the point that, having that functionality and showing the numbers right there with it, make this easy to engage with. And then, just another note on context, as you move into specific program analysis, and there's a million different places you can go with this, from tracking all your campaign response rates and all of the campaign level data, you can have them be a little bit more rich with lots of data, because your users and the people who are going to be getting into that level of detail will have more inherent context. So you can get a little bit more granular, I would say. They have more context, and you need that context to be able to interpret the dashboards appropriately. It's also a place with the proper data structure where you can start to explore some really interesting things in terms of where campaign performance and donor level attributes start to intersect. We're not going to go deep here because of time mostly, but you can see you could start to have some dashboards that are looking at some more complicated visualizations or across more dimensions. And the good stuff is where you can overlay those attributes as filters, or bring them into a view in order to explore more of those questions about who specific efforts are working for. And lastly, here I would say you can make some pretty complex data much more digestible. This is an example of like a forecasting tool that we use. It lives in Excel. And it's a 30 tab, probably 20,000 worth of cells of data. And we're able to bubble that all up and get out of that view, put this into a data visualization tool, and just get the snapshot. What are we looking for? There's still drill down functionality. We can compare one financial scenario to another. We can look at specific segment performance, all with a couple clicks of a button. But the main point here, you can take really complex data structures and just turn it into a one-pager that can be looked at someone who doesn't have all the context and sort of understand the trends.
And as you're building this, you said you were building toward the requirements that your organization has. How do you aggregate all of those requirements to kick off the process?
Well, I think it's a lot of conversations, right? You want to understand who's your audience, what are you, what are you trying to, what's the purpose of the dashboards? We spent a lot of time when we were going through our first round of dashboard development in thinking through all of that and involving the stakeholders to understand and make sure that we were going to be providing something that would be useful to organizations and to our account teams, right? This is a primary way that our account teams now kind of take that front line in terms of answering questions. So we need to make sure it served the people it was meant to serve. And one more thing, most of what I showed you to this point was based on fundraising metrics. and ways of, showing those. Operational dashboards can really help. They can help with things like quality control. We've incorporated this thinking into our sort of standard operating procedure for our sort of THD boost segmentation and selection tool. Sort of takes a modeled approach to campaign selections. So both the selection process and then the QC views come to us directly in a dashboard view. And it really helps ensure the outcomes that we're getting from the modeled selects are as expected. And I'm sure that in each of your different organizations, you could think of 100 different operational applications, but the point being that dashboards don't have to be 100% about performance and performance analysis. They can be to monitor operational considerations for things like QC and for just workflow within your teams.
And a question on that, in addition to these sorts of financial metrics, could you also be doing mission metrics on this type of dashboard?
Absolutely. And I know some organizations that have, put together nice visual trackers of their mission work. This could be from, the number of beneficiaries served across the world to, I don't know, the number of meals a food bank serves. I mean, there's ways to track any of those KPIs. The KPIs for all of you as organizations aren't solely financial, but I think the dashboards offer a way to routinely track and make visible those KPIs that might otherwise, reside in a spreadsheet someplace. So I think I think you absolutely can do that. Okay. All right, so we're taking a look at some views, and before we talk through just some of the key questions that you should be asking when you kick off your own projects, I want to review a few more tips that are important to consider when undertaking dashboard development. First, and we kind of somewhat alluded to this before, automated data collection is the key to real-time insights. Anything that's manual ends up being time-consuming, even for experienced analysts. So, using ETLs and APIs, you want to get to that point where you're collecting data automatically. For example, here, these are some of our digital dashboards that we've created. The left graphic, we're looking at some digital attribution showing the lift of assisting channels on final conversions. In the right graphic, you can see return on ad spend in digital channels, and shows overall ROAS by month plus a breakdown of each digital channel. This is all supported by an ETL directly from Google Analytics. So, that's something we need to recalibrate a little bit with GA4, but it's an example of where we're automating the flow. It doesn't need to be manipulated in a huge way, and it's coming straight into our dashboard environment. And that same thing, as I mentioned before, kind of holds true for external data points. You want to be able to bring them into your environment in a way that requires as little manipulation as possible.
And for those who aren't as familiar with this sort of dashboard creative, ETL, extract, transform, and load, can you explain that process a little bit?
Yeah, without getting overly technical, this would be the way that you get that data delivered to you in sort of a electronic fashion that is you're bringing it out, and you have the pipeline set up to be able to bring it, make sure the data's in good shape when you get it, and push it directly into your system. Another thing that you really want to make sure is, you may need different dashboards for different stakeholders, right? There's not a one size fits all. So you really need to ask, who are you building for? What's the purpose? Is this an executive summary? Is this for leadership and they have 30 seconds to look at it? Is it for the financial team? And so you need, more numbers, maybe less visualizations. What's on budget, what's not? Is it a program manager? And this is when you get into some of the more complex visualizations, but they bring the context to be able to interpret them. What's working well, what's lagging behind, or is it for operational team? So it's just something that you want to make sure you're understanding. I showed this before, but use a combination of charts and numbers, right? It's tempting once you're in the dashboard environment to want to chart everything, but you don't want to bury your most important data points that may be best represented just as numbers. So make them big numbers, make them stand out, provide some of that right there on the page. And usually those make the best dashboards, a combination of those two things. And give those prominent headline and realize thing. You don't want to overcharge here. Too many views in one dashboard and nothing will pop, right? You kind of want to answer everything, but think about the insight you're trying to get at and have a dashboard that is going right for that insight in a simple way. You can have another view that gets at something else, but too much stuff in one dashboard can be overwhelming. I think these are examples of a little bit of a too much. And this one on the left is using like 7 different types of visualization techniques, and it's not labeled all that well. It's a little hard to read. And this one on the right is, of course, is obvious, the distribution of Major League Soccer salaries by team, right? So, but this is an example of one that might be a little overwhelming. There's a lot going on. I'm not really sure what it is. So, be judicious and make sure you're staying on point with your views.
We mentioned ETL and QC previously. So how long does it take to do that setup work before the dashboarding can be used?
It depends upon the shape. This is gonna like an out answer, but it really depends upon the shape of the data and the system, right? Some systems that you're tunneling into to get the data, or where you have processes in place to get data delivered from, are pretty streamlined, or already sort of have applications that can help with some of this. Some of them don't. Some data is very well coded, has all the breakouts that you already need defined in the root CRM system. So that's almost like a straight pass through. It's when the manipulation needs to happen through additional coding, adds layer, that can take a little extra time to bring that in. It's hard to put an exact time frame on that. What I will say is we did all of our dashboard development as sort of an iterative process, right? So we were building and we were reviewing and we were looking for ways to refine and streamline throughout the process, to the point where we got to a good place. But it's just going to be a little bit different for each, for each organization, depending on the state of your data.
And speaking of that quality control, do you have any tips for QCing that automated data collection regularly, making sure your data is correctly represented, nothing's missing? The example they give are updated costs.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, right, there's another source of truth that you have as a point of comparison to be able to look at the cost and, that shows up in a dashboard and compare that to. You need some point of comparison to be able to do that QC. There's certainly been times where we've seen something that seemed off and we've questioned it, and there's always a reason why that's the case. Sometimes something's changed in the source data. Sometimes, a coding changed, and next thing you know, something's not going into the bucket that you were expecting. We can usually track back through, in the programming that sits behind this to understand where something might have gone off, but you definitely will need a source of truth. We love to tie out directly wherever possible to what finance is reporting. So sometimes it's just being on the same page. How are they categorizing and, making sure, and that seems like that would be such a given in our space, but it's just not always the case. Sometimes that lives in a different system.
And just amongst us, sometimes finance doesn't have it right, and it's a good check on them.
Well, you never know. Yeah. While dashboards are built to be intuitive, don't be afraid to include instructions for your users. Little how-to instructions in your dashboards, little notes. Hey, click here for more information. We have some overlays that kind of come up across the screen and tell you what each section's meant to do. But you want to bring users through the story that you want them to be able to tell. And training is really important, right? The more people feel comfortable with the dashboard and start to understand how they use it, the more usage you'll get from that dashboard. And so, all of those things are critical elements on that front. And I think I already mentioned this, but don't underestimate the importance of collaboration, right? In our development projects, it's been developers, it's been strategists. We've talked to dashboard users, we've talked to organizations to make sure that what we were putting together was going to meet needs. So as you develop your schedules for putting together a project plan together, have some of those key milestone meetings in there to get that feedback. And don't be afraid to have ongoing releases. So you build something and we know, okay, in another month and a half, we're going to have another release and we're going to incorporate some new thinking and enhancements at that time. I think I said this at the outset, but everyone brings a different perspective, between those developers and the strategists and the organization. So, and they, you want to benefit from all those different perspectives. So I've shared some example views, some best practices, and now I just want to reiterate some of the key questions that you want to ask yourself as you're embarking on your dashboard journeys. Let's see, the first question, and I alluded to this before, who are you building it for? What's the purpose, right? Organization executives, are they program managers? Is it operations? And those are going to dictate the type of dashboard you create, the richness and the depth of the data in those dashboard views. And ultimately, I think you probably want to have a whole suite if you really take advantage of that dashboarding software and create a suite of reports that span the different audiences. But it's definitely a question you want to ask yourself. And then there's what are the most relevant KPIs for my organization? There's a bunch of the obvious ones on the page here, revenue, donors. We talked about it before. It could be mission metrics. There's no doubt about that. Things like long-term value, media impressions, right? Like these are all the types of things that you can measure, quantify, and then visualize through a dashboard. You start to look at donor journeys, right? Then you might start looking or high priority actions that you're looking for people to take. You might start looking at things like time to upgrade or channel migration, because we know those multi-channel donors are really important. We want to understand the rate that's happening, right? So there's a million different things you could look at. They don't all have to be in the fundraising area, as I mentioned. But what's important to you? What's the guiding light for your organizations? And it's going to give you the insight you need to move strategy forward. Are there any data gaps we need to address? So you've identified your needs, what you want to track. Now you got to do a gap analysis. Do we have everything we need, or do we need to secure some additional data? most organizations have really good basic transaction data. Sometimes coding can get in the way of that, but do you store all the promotion data? Do you have that available so you can understand more about campaigns and touch points? With donor data, is there certain demographic data that you want to filter on that you need to secure or have on file in order to make that something that you can, it could be age, wealth, anything like that. And lastly, those outside data sources, we've got the market stuff, the unemployment, like we mentioned, but I'm sure you as an organization, there might be other things that are important to you. If you're international relief, maybe there's something about refugee movement or something like that, just as an example, right? So those, we want to think through all of that and understand where do you need to bolster the data that you do have. And then, as you're actually implementing the dashboards, are the visualizations aligned with the story you want to tell, right? And sort of each data visualization method has its own use cases. So, for instance, pie charts are great for comparing different parts of a whole. It can be good for like budget breakdowns, survey results, things like that, but they're not really meant to make comparisons between two different separate data sets. So be mindful of the visualizations. There's a lot of great resources out there. And quite frankly, with any of these dashboarding platforms, there's a lot of resources they've put out there to help steer you in the right direction. Revenue over time is usually best expressed as a line chart, as opposed to a bar chart, things like that. And then also, right, like how should you use color, right? You want to be judicious about this. Too much can be disoriented, not enough might make it harder to find the insight. So those are all sort of executional things that can help tell the story in a clear and meaningful way. And then lastly here, how should I organize my dashboards? Because it's really important for you that the user experience is smooth. If it's clunky, your users will stop visiting. And you can help ensure this by making sure the navigation from one view to the next is in a logical order and that like views are sort of clustered together. If you have 50 views, that might be too many and overwhelming. 3 to 4, potentially, right? Not enough. It really depends upon what you're trying to highlight and the purpose of the dashboard and who your audience is. Lastly, I will say there's portal products out there that allow you to nest something like online Tableau or Power BI into a wrapper, which allows you a little bit more flexibility for how you lay out that navigation. An example of this, we use this for our THD Lens product. And it's, a little bit more of a user-friendly experience in some of these platforms. So in review here, just again, key principles: automate your data flow where possible, know who your audience is, who you're gearing the dashboards towards, make sure the KPIs are in alignment with your organizational goals. Do your best to reflect the holistic audience performance. We are whole donors, right? Include a multitude of gift dimensions, channel, source, list, and donor attributes, things like age, gender, well scores, whatever you can get your hands on to enrich your insights. Again, that's where a lot of the good stuff comes from. Make sure you're aligning consistent design elements across the views. Use those filters and drop downs. They're great for engaging users and getting it to be interactive rather than just something I'm looking at. Do everything you can to contextualize your dashboard metrics where appropriate. You can include those detailed data views, but know that those are going to be more geared towards sort of program owners or maybe account teams who are digging in to derive as much strategic insight as possible. And portals at times are helpful for sort of improving the user experience. And that's really all I had today. So I definitely open it up to any other questions people have. I know we covered a lot of territory, a lot of ground in a short period of time. So I'm certainly happy to make myself available at any point. You can reach out to me LinkedIn, phone, email. However you want to get in touch, I'm happy to answer any other questions or go into more detail on anything. But I'm happy that so many people joined today, and hopefully you got something out of this webinar.
Thank you so much for joining. Feel free to shoot in those questions. We do have a couple in the chat. First is, do you have any particular views that are your favorite? I know personally, I always like to see, if I'm looking at response rate, I also always want to look at average gift and vice versa, so that I'm not ignoring one for the other. Any recommendations on things that people should be looking for like that?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I love some of the just high level views because they can go straight to the top, right? They can, if you're the president of your organization needs a really quick view of what's going on, and and has a minute to get that information. I love some of the clean executive summary views. On the other hand, as someone who has spent much of my life digging into complex accounts and organizations and the trends, things like response rate by campaign over time. But the thing I really love on top of that is being able to filter down to a specific audience, because where you see those trends start to differentiate from each other, there's a certain pattern that it has overall. But when I see that pattern diverge because I've filtered down to, I don't know, it could be a group of people who are caregivers for an organization. It could be, people who came in through a particular source. That's when I start to see that they're behaving differently, or that they're interested. Maybe their response is best to a campaign that looks like a middle campaign relative to the entire audience. Right, that's where you start to get the insight of, like, maybe we should steer more of the content for this audience towards that thing that worked awesome in that time frame that we couldn't see until we cross-section the campaign performance with the donor attributes. So that's where I always find the best stuff.
Well, and if I can put words in your mouth for a moment, it sounds like you're saying that it's also an evolving dashboard, that as your stakeholders come up with additional questions, you may be trying to create additional views that help answer those. So for example, you showed the overall retention rate on the front page of the dashboard. If that retention rate's dropping, you may want to create the page behind that says, well, actually, your first year retention and your multi-year retention are both going up. It just happened that you had a lot of new donors, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's super helpful to have that context. Yes.